Good morning, members and friends of St. Mark's Lutheran Church in Wilmington, Delaware. We have a very special guest here today in the person of Rabbi Peter Grumbacher, Rabbi Emeritus of Congregation Beth Emeth in Wilmington, now serving in another capacity out of state. He can tell you about that. We would like this to be just a simply free talking opportunity, and we hope that it's enriching for you as we understand more about life in the Jewish community, religiously and otherwise. And Peter and I have talked about this a dozen times, maybe 1,000 times, who knows. So we hope that you are able to plug into what it is that we're doing. So welcome, Peter.
Thank you.
Say a couple things about yourself.
I was ordained in 1972 from the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion, the campus in Cincinnati, Ohio. There are other campuses as well. And I came to Wilmington then as the assistant rabbi and director of education. And I've been there ever since. I retired in 2009. I was way too young. But I did certain things between then and about 4 years ago, and I decided that I had to follow in the footsteps of my friend over here. So I became interim rabbi in Winchester, Virginia for 2 years, and then 1 year in Stanton, Virginia, and now I'm in Harrisonburg, Virginia, where I served last year and this year as well. The most interesting thing about the Harrisonburg congregation is that exactly 50 years ago, I was their student rabbi for 2 years. So that's sort of an exciting thing, at least to me, because all those people are basically new, they don't care. But that's about it from a professional point of view. And I'm married with 3 kids and 6 grandchildren, and everything is good.
Is the reason that you're doing all your interims in Virginia because Susie wants you to not be around, or?
Well, that's part of it, but that's absolute coincidence. Absolute coincidence. Okay. Well, when I was in Winchester for 2 years, the president of the congregation happened to have been my son, which could have actually been a very difficult situation to be in, but it worked out well because all of the rabbi congregational issues or dealings were given over to his vice president. Anyway, it turned out to be just fine.
Okay, just a word. I was at Concordia Lutheran Church in town here, which used to be right next to Beth Emeth before we moved out onto Silverside Road. I was there for 30 years, or just under 30 years, and retired in 2006 from there, and have done about 7 or 8 intentional interims since that time. And St. Mark's Lutheran Church was a church with whom we had worked and ministered together. So when they became without their pastor, I volunteered, and the bishop said, go get him. So here I am. I've been here almost a year. Now, before we get started even further, I want to show you this contraption. Peter and I and Sister Jean Cashman teach a class at Osher Academy on interfaith relations, and we have the gong. So if one of us says something offensive to the others, if we go on and on and on, need to be stopped, we use the gong. So it could be that the gong will be used today, maybe not. We'll see. But that's a way of stopping, if you will, each other when that becomes necessary.
It's called a gong show.
The gong show. Peter, how are the congregations that you've served, in particular, I guess the one in Harrisonburg, handling the COVID situation?
Well, a number of ways. Ever since the isolation began, I decided that I had to reach out and touch somebody. So every day I have an article that I write, and I end that article with a joke. And I'm finding that the people are responding far more to the jokes than they are to the articles. And they're being very judgmental in terms of my sense of humor, but they're not the only ones. And that has really, it's really helped because they get a feeling that there's a real tie between the synagogue and the congregation with those articles. But also every other week or so, we've been having Sabbath services on Friday night via Zoom. And I'm sure you found as well, because I know that colleagues of mine all over the country have found that there are more people who show up at the services they conduct via Zoom than show up in the sanctuary. So there's a positive to that. And for sure, somehow or other, it's going to continue in one form or another. We are now really doing a lot of planning for our high holy days, Rosh Hashanah, which is the New Year, and Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. This year, they're beginning September 18th. And all kinds of plans are being made, especially technologically. And we developed a way to be able to both live stream and to Zoom the services. So they're going to be really like 4 people in the sanctuary, and who knows how many people via live stream and Zoom watching. So that's one thing we're doing as well. And 2 weeks ago, I was down there, and we had the first live stream service, which was an experiment, and it really worked well because we were able to find out all of those little things that had to be adjusted so that it would be much easier for people to view, the services and get something out of it. But we're masked and we're very safe in terms of distance. So the challenges are there, but hopefully we'll be able to meet them. And you?
Please notice that Peter and I are sitting at an appropriate distance from each other.
Not far enough.
We brought our masks, but we're not wearing them as we speak because we've done the social distancing part. Here at St. Mark's, we have been now since right before Easter recording services, first in an audio fashion, and since Easter with visual as well, and we've got increasing capacity to live stream and so forth. And John, who's on the other side of the camera today, has been an absolute genius at putting these things together. And people are really fundamentally appreciating them, so much that we too have a concern that perhaps people will just get used to staying home, right, especially since they're also watching services that the Synod, in our case, or another congregation in town here is offering, or it seems like everybody's got a relative in a congregation out in the Midwest somewhere, right, and they're tuning into that too. So they're getting more religion now than they did right, before the virus.
But we're finding that people were doing that before, that they were taking advantage of the wonderful synagogues in the country whose rabbis are renowned and whose cantors are renowned, and they actually, even for the high holy days, they stay at home and they watch those services, and they can go from one to the next, and they don't even have to get dressed if they don't want to.
Peter, say just a little bit about the high holy days.
The high holy days are our most sacred days of the year. A lot of our holidays are based on either history or on agriculture, for example, Passover. But the high holy days are strictly religious, where we focus on our relationship with each other and our relationship with God. On the New Year, Rosh Hashanah, we basically welcome the New Year with prayers that we're able to search our souls and know what we did in the past year that should be changed. And Yom Kippur is the Day of Atonement, and our prayers are, let's say, a little bit more fervent. But they focus on the individual, which is unusual compared to the other holidays of the year. But they are our most sacred days.
One of my favorite places in Israel, and I haven't been there for a while because we, in our trips, have not had occasion to offer people free days because the trips are so compact. But when there is a free day, I love to go to the Israeli Museum. And one of the things I remember from there are the miniature stick things of synagogues around the world. And it appears to me that synagogues they evolved into as much discussion and educational context as they did worship ones.
Right.
Is that accurate?
Absolutely.
So when did synagogues develop into places of worship on the Sabbath or Sabbath Eve and so forth?
Well, you still have to turn that around. There was always the sacrifices that were brought to the temples in Jerusalem. And when the second temple was destroyed, there were sort of like pseudo-synagogues that had already developed outside the land of Israel. And some say the second that the temple was destroyed, synagogues popped up all over the place and went from being places of sacrifice, because we have not had a sacrifice since the temple was destroyed. I want to make that perfectly clear. There's stories about that too that I experienced. No sacrifices since the second temple was destroyed. But the rabbis of old decided that the synagogues had to have three functions. They were a house of worship, a house of gathering, and a house of study. And we said that study and good deeds substituted for sacrifices. And our worship was actually developed in terms of the prayer book. So so that's sort of the answer to your question. But along the way, they've grown and they've expanded, and different religious perspectives have become part of different synagogues, and they're functioning fairly well. I mean, I think that synagogues today have the same problem that churches and synagogues have. They are shrinking, they're merging, they're closing. So it's a challenge. And this virus and its after effects or its effects are going to be extremely, extremely significant in terms of the future of the synagogue. I think in terms of the future of religion, not only as far as the Zooming and live streaming is concerned, but just major questions as to how we're going to proceed with the functions that the synagogues traditionally have had.
I might just add that on the, I guess, dozen occasions where I've had opportunity to worship at Beth Emeth on a Sabbath Eve especially, I've been struck by the prayers and how similar they are, and how I could, in very good conscience, pray them along with the congregation. Obviously, there are other parts of the service that I didn't understand or couldn't keep up with. But Peter, I've got a question for you, and I will answer it as well after you do, and that's not a trick. I said, to what would you attribute yours and my relationship lasting as long as it has? And that has been over 40 years.
I've wondered the same thing, actually. I think we have a lot in common. I think also there's a mutual respect for each other and for our religions and the similarities and the differences. Sometimes you speak to somebody and they feel as if when they speak to me, that I'm going to hell, and I can sense that immediately. But unless you're a terrific actor, I have never sensed that with you. So I think that's one of the reasons. Plus, because of that, we've been involved in the same kinds of missions, in terms of social justice, our relationship through the National Conference of Christians and Jews of blessed memory, and all of those things that hopefully will create a society where all people, regardless of faith, regardless of age, regardless of whatever it is, can live together. And I think, we focus on that, and that is what eliminates a lot of these differences that for some people are so important. What's important is the way we live.
I would agree that we have developed really very early on a mutual respect for each other as professionals. We learned rather quickly to, I think, enjoy each other's company as persons. We've socialized with each other and so forth. But we've gone to Israel together 3 times, plan another trip in the not too distant future, we hope.
God willing.
We have attended things together. We have been, as you say, involved in those things in the street that have to do with social justice, because we believe that. I would say about not consigning you to hell that I'm not a good actor. That's just beyond my pay grade, and I've said that 1,000 times Peter. I don't judge, and it's not my calling, it's not my purpose, it's not my passion. And in the meantime, we've got a world to live in.
Exactly.
And that world to live in needs us to be as together as we possibly can, given whatever it is about our faith systems that motivate that, so that we can, again, speak to the justice issues and speak to peace issues and so forth in our context here and in contexts around the world. You have anything you want to ask me, by the way?
No, but I do have a story that I have to tell because it's in my head, and if I don't tell it, it'll be out of my head. One of probably the earliest major connections that we had was way back when, 4 decades or so ago, when we had found out that there was anti-Catholic graffiti that had been smeared on a wall downtown in Wilmington. And there were 5 clergy who went down there to whitewash the graffiti. And it was also caught by the News Journal. So they came down with a reporter and a photographer. And we were, I don't think we were on the first page, on the front page, but we were in there. And it had the 5 of us, and it indicated our names. And the 4 ministers, the 4 Christians, was David, 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 and David. And the rabbi was Peter. Well, that to me was hysterical, and everybody else as well. But the important thing about that, other than the fact that we were able to get together, is that Sister Jean Cashman got wind of it, and on behalf of the diocese, because she was working for the diocese at that time, wrote a thank you letter to us. And that was how we connected. So from that day on, literally, the 3 of us have been very, very good friends. But I will never forget the 4 Davids and Peter.
And not one Roman Catholic, by the way, and that was also significant to people. We weren't asked to do it by the Catholics. We just did it, and it did appear on the front page of the paper, and then the article was on the inside as well.
Oh.
So, what about? Let me get at this in a very surgical way. Generally speaking, in my context, and especially as an interim pastor, when one is around a congregation for a while, it's a little different, but maybe not a whole lot different. How can one address moral issues that are going on publicly from the pulpit or in whatever other context without sounding like or making it appear as if we're being politically partisan? There are issues going on right now. For instance, I don't believe that hunger in America is first and foremost a political issue. How we deal with it is, or a part of how we deal with it is. I believe that's a deeply spiritual problem. When both of our testaments speak to taking care of people in our contexts, we are mandated to have a passion for that and something of the heart and to respond appropriately. But how would that work in your context? That is, speaking out, again, about a moral issue or a justice issue, and running the risk of it being interpreted by people within your congregation primarily as a partisan political statement.
In all of my career, I've stayed away from political issues that were blatantly political. But as you said, there are so many issues in terms of our living in a society that require our response to them. And as somebody once said, if there's anything in Jewish tradition, either in Hebrew scriptures or in post-biblical literature, that speaks to it, then regardless of how it's perceived, it has to be addressed. So therefore, it's not difficult for me to quote the prophets or to quote the rabbis of old, or to interpret something that I really feel can be interpreted from an ethical or moral perspective. However, having said that, there are certain things that are ethically and morally obvious to me as being as needing to be addressed. And to me, it's not a matter of Republican, Democrat. It's a matter of the ethics and moral of the occupant of the White House that that needs to be addressed. And you can go just so far without saying anything. And there are going to be people who who are dyed in the wool, this party or that party, who are going to disagree with you. But if you feel as if they are ethical and moral issues, then I'm not saying you, I'm me. If I feel it, then I'm going to say it. 4 years ago, I gave a sermon based upon a portion in Deuteronomy that talked about the characteristics and necessities and that which a king should not be, and I related it right to the election. And I will tell you that I did it in front of 600 people, and there were about 10 people who got up and walked out. But it was the first time in my professional life that I got a standing ovation. I wasn't looking for a standing ovation, but it told me something. It told me that those issues are obviously Jewish issues, okay? And that there's some people who responded politically, and there's some people who responded ethically, morally. Now, I think that those people who gave me the standing ovation were not voting for the person in power right now. But be that as it may, to me it didn't make any difference. I said it, and I repeated it in another synagogue and in another synagogue. And the response was, for all intents and purposes, the same. Unfortunately, I didn't get a standing ovation, but I could tell, there was agreement.
Do you like standing ovations, Peter?
I don't know. I only got one, and it wasn't bad. But
I got a letter one time. A phone call. I'm sorry. This goes back. I remember I was in Toledo, and we left there in 1971 or 76. From a young man who was graduating from college, and he called me to thank me for being a very real part of his both spiritual and personal development. Mm-hmm. I had his confirmation class and youth group and so forth and so on. And when he said this to me, after I got up off the floor, I said, "Hold on, I need to get a tape recorder because I'm going to need to play this over and over again."
Nobody's going to believe it.
I haven't gotten a call like that since.
Right.
So we take what we can get. Now let's jump several thousand miles to the east. You could go to the west, but it's a little longer. And to that country that you and I have visited together 3 times, and hopefully a 4th soon, and that each of us has been visiting for perhaps a dozen times or more prior to that or in addition to that. How important is it to you as an American Jew that I, as an American Christian or as an American citizen, have respect for the policies of the government of Israel? And I know that's complicated, but let me put it another way. Could I be accused of being anti-Semitic if I had issues or took issues with the policies of the government of Israel, especially about, for instance, the Palestinian question?
No. I don't think so. I think there are people in this country who are definitely anti-Semitic and use anti-Israel statements and propaganda as sort of a shield against being called an anti-Semite. But I think that there are legitimate things to criticize about Israel. American Jews criticize Israel about them. I do. I found that a lot of the policies of previous governments might have been upsetting to some, but I didn't think that they were immoral or unethical. I do believe that what's going on right now is immoral and unethical. And I think, to be honest, that Netanyahu and Trump are birds of a feather. And I think that's a very sad situation, especially because so many American Jews feel that that politically it's important to support Israel, and they are supporting the President of the United States because of his supposed love of Israel. I don't believe he loves Israel, and I don't believe he loves Jews. But I think he's doing it for political reasons, for his base. And I think a lot of the things that he's doing are wrong. And I think that the support that he's getting from Israel is also for the wrong reason. I believe absolutely about the necessity for the state of Israel to continue. I believe that there are real enemies that Israel still has. Iran, the neighbors except for Egypt and Jordan never signed a peace treaty with Israel. You have Hamas, you have other terrorist groups that are lobbing missiles into Israel. That's wrong, and they have to be defended. However, I also feel as if what's going on with the Palestinians is wrong. I believe in a two-state solution. To tell you the truth, it's the only way that there's going to be peace, hopefully. But certainly the way it's going right now, there can't be any peace. And I mean, it would be so much easier if the Palestinians would put a little bit of their energy into working with the state of Israel, because those countries that do work with the state of Israel are finding great reward. But if your focus is constantly on eliminating a nation, what are you doing for your own citizens? Nothing. And you could see the dire straits that the Palestinians are in. But it's much more convenient and expedient for their leadership to continually plug the point that Israel is an enemy, it should be thrown into the sea. Well, there's got to be it's a two-way street here. In America, however, there are people who are, viewing the actions of Israel as similar to apartheid. They're wrong, but they're not similar to apartheid. But it's very unnerving the way that many American, many of those in America who are not Jewish, and some Jews as well, who are viewing the policy of the United States as too close to Israel.
But I would certainly agree from my perspective, and I have contacts over there. I just heard from one this morning, actually. There are protests going on in Israel as we speak. Yeah. And what I'm told about them is they're significant, but not very effective. Right. It's just really hard to break it. But there's a noticeable, and I don't really know how large, but a peace movement within Israel of Jews. Right. And can you say anything about that? How large is it? How significant and influential might it be?
Honestly, I really don't know all that much about it. I just rather not say anything because I don't know about it. But I do know that when it comes to the voting booth, there are certain segments of the country who the numbers are, for all intents and purposes, greater than anybody who is pushing for peace, because they're looking for more land. They're looking for pushing down of the Palestinians. So, when you get to the voting booth, it's very similar to what's going on around here.
My understanding, and this goes back a ways, is that one of the mantras of the peace movement in Israel is by their policies, particularly toward the Palestinians, the building of settlements on Palestinian land and those kinds of things, what the Palestinians refer to as the occupation. I'm not real sure that that's what the Israelis call it. Is occupation what they refer to their to the Israeli government's relationship with the Palestinian community?
Do Israelis call it that?
Yeah.
I'm sure some of them do, but most refer to it as the either Greater Israel or Judea and Samaria.
So, but this quote argument that the peacemakers in Israel purportedly have waged is that by these policies, they're denying their Jewishness. That quote, Jews would never do that to anybody because they've been through it themselves, kind of thing.
Whose ox is being gored? That's one of the problems. I mean, I agree with that. I think there's so many things that are that speak against everything that the prophet spoke about. And look, and I know that I've spoken, given talks around the country about my dad's experiences in the Holocaust and as a United States soldier. You can overuse the Holocaust. You can. However, the point is that biblically, 36 times in the Torah, the refrain is, you shall not, whatever it is, for you were slaves in the land of Egypt. You shall not oppress the stranger. You shall not oppress the widow. You shall not oppress the orphan, for you were strangers in the land of Israel, in Egypt. Which means that there is a lesson that we should have learned as far as our relationship with other people based upon our experience ourselves. And we have to always remember that. And I think that's the basis of our American Jewish perspective on social justice, and many, many, many in Israel as well. They have internalized the message of Judaism, of the prophets, and of post-biblical Judaism. And it's sad that just some people don't realize it, that power yields some of this attitude.
It begs a question for me, and there are arguments around this that I've heard too. Is there such a thing as the Judeo-Christian ethic in your mind?
Loosely speaking, yeah, there is. Because for all intents and purposes, Christianity and Judaism, from an ethical perspective, believe in the same thing. How real and close it is, I'm not exactly sure. And I'm not saying that to be cute. I'm just not sure.
On the basis of the teachings of Jesus, ethically and so forth, it seems to me that we have all kinds of things that we can agree on and talk about. We get into conflict or tensions when we talk about Jesus as Christ. I just preached a sermon, and you had a copy of it before we got here today, where I don't believe in any way that Jews are Christ killers. You and I addressed that very early on in our relationship. Theologically speaking, biblically speaking, virtually everybody on earth is responsible for the crucifixion of Christ in our way of thinking, so it's not leveled at any one group or a portion of a group. And we have no right, biblically speaking, I can find nothing in there that gives us permission to hate anybody. Whatever their perceived crime or sin or whatever it is, it's not there. Where that gets to be problematic, and historically speaking, the Christian church was pacifistic for its first 300 years until the conversion of Constantine. So post-Constantine, questions about Christians serving in military and issues of the state's right to execute and all of those kind of moral, ethical questions have been disputed within the Christian community as to what's appropriate and what isn't. But my hunch is that same kind of argument about those same kinds of things could go on in your context.
Absolutely. But
we can enter that argument, as you said early on here today, with things we have in common about that which we believe about those ethical questions. Okay. Be nice to ask the audience what they would like to ask us.
What would you like to ask?
But they are a bit
distant
today. That, though, begs a question. Please, if you are so inclined and have a question, or as I have shared previously, a complaint, a criticism about what happened today, please send it in. Peter can always come back. We're still speaking to each other. We socialize our families together. We participate in each other's celebrations over the years. And I'm sure that he would come back if we need to do that, to clarify some things or to further discuss those issues which are not easy to deal with. Anything else, Peter, on your mind? Let me ask this. In 2020, not certainly as it relates only to me, but as a Reformed Jew, is there anything that you would like to see happen with Christians about Jews or about Israel? And I say, I give you a broad sphere here. Say anything you want. I don't have anything particular in mind.
Yeah, I do, and it's education. When I said early on that we don't do sacrifices anymore, I had an experience 40 years ago where a group of kids, a large group of kids, came to the temple, as they very often do, this from a parochial school. And the leader of the group, the teacher of the group, asked to see the room in which we do sacrifices. I was thrown for a loop, and I said, for 2,000 years we haven't done sacrifices. And her response was incredible. She said, well, we're in the process of changing textbooks, which totally disarmed me. I mean, yeah, I laughed, but it's not funny, because the ignorance about Judaism and Jews towards Christianity is phenomenal. My wife did speech therapy in South Jersey for 30-something years. And every year, the same people would ask the question about Christmas. Why don't you celebrate Christmas? I don't know if they were trying to set her up. I don't know what. But they should know that we have no connection to Jesus in terms of Christ or whatever it is. So just understanding or listening to or learning about what Judaism is all about is important. And I'll tell you, anti-Semitism is on the rise, as many people know. And I'm convinced that so much of it has not so much to do with theology as it has to do with just ignorance of not knowing. It's a tragedy. And the worst part about it is, we were hoping after the Holocaust, this kind of thing would not happen again, but it's happening again. But that's not really the question you're asking. So I would hope that people learn about Judaism and I always tell groups when I speak, especially to kids, don't ever ask me a stupid question. And the stupid question is defined as a question you don't ask. There is no stupid question. Ask it, okay? And it will be answered.
One of the things that I not only respect but envy about your context, I presume that it's universal within Judaism, is the emphasis on educating your own people about Jewish history and Jewish values and so forth and so on. And I would have to say that after nearly 50 years in the ministry, the thing I regret the most is that I didn't spend more time, despite all the resistances of people's busyness and so forth and so on, trying to educate our own Christian people about the teachings of Christianity. Mm-hmm. I once asked what are the Ten Commandments, which is basic, obviously, to you and to us, or at least it gets talked as if it is. And one person's answer was, be kind to animals. Now, I don't think either of our faiths wants us to harm animals. No, but per se, it isn't in the commandments. And yet that got stated. And so those educating ourselves about our own context would help on the Christian side our impulse to understand others before we make judgments like that.
By the way, caring about animals is an integral part of the tradition, where you can't have an ox and a donkey plowing at the same the same field together.
That'd be cockeyed anyway, wouldn't it?
What?
That would be cockeyed anyway.
Yeah, for sure. So this is another true story. My predecessor once said to me, he said, I just had an amazing experience. He said, I did a funeral, and after the funeral, somebody came up to me and they told me what church they belonged to. And what they could not understand is how Jews could possibly use the 23rd Psalm in a funeral, because Christians did. And my predecessor said, ma'am, who wrote the 23rd Psalm? It was David, of course. Oh. So, there's so much we don't know about ourselves, let alone each other.
All right. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, again, I hope this has been revealing to you. Please send in whatever you want us to hear. We'll deal with it as adults. and hopefully we can continue to grow together, at least in terms of those issues we have in common. And as we get to know each other in that context and others like it, avoid those kinds of tensions that are literally deadly. It just isn't a part of what helps in our world. So thanks, Peter, for your time.
Thank you for inviting me.
And we'll do it again
My
sometime.
pleasure.